Hey, what's going on, William?
Not much, Vic. How are you?
Oh man, I'm doing well. How things been going? You been doing any wargaming lately?
I wargame every day, Vic. I'm an addict.
I know that's kind of a rhetorical question. I already knew the answer to it, but yeah. So that's great. What are you diving into these days?
I'm doing a non-historical scenario based around the Maryland campaign during the American Civil War. I'm playing actually a mirror match. I'm doing both one game as North, one game as South against the same opponent, so we can compare and contrast each other's strategies.
Oh, dude, that's awesome. So would you say that like your consumption deals mainly with like tabletop? Are you card? Are you digital?
Primarily digital. Actually, I'm a huge fan of War Game Design Studio and their variety of war games covering anywhere from, the ages of musket and pike, medieval era, to even contemporary up to modern day.
And they've got a pretty large like catalog of stuff to choose from.
Pretty
right?
large. Actually, they do have some on, the Global War on Terror. I haven't looked to see if, I can find any of your units. If there's a Vic Rubel character out there.
Yeah, dude, if you had a Vic Rubel in Abu Hayat, the main thing you'd probably have to deal with is the time spent in the smoke pit, sleeping, and then cursing as I was falling down wadis would be your big dilemma.
I don't even need to buy the game to do that. I can just do that on a daily basis. Well, anyways, so yeah, definitely recommend War Game Design Studio. In fact, on the Marine Corps Association website, if you go to our professional development page, you see decision-making games and exercises. We actually have a discount section.
Oh, yeah. Is there a code that comes with that?
Yeah, it's MCA 25, capital M, capital C, capital A, 25, just the numerics, and you can go and get 25% off of any order for any amount of games you want. So if you buy, all 100 plus games, it's 25% off.
Buy one, 25% off.
Precisely.
Awesome. And then, so if I went to War Game Design Studios and I put in that discount code of MCA25, I'm in.
You're in, buddy.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, and you or anyone listening to this could put that code in, and then maybe if you're unfortunate enough, you'll actually face me on the battlefield. And
that would be unfortunate, especially for me. But especially as we are looking at we've had episodes where we've talked about on the show where we've talked about potential wars across the globe, and then limited training, and you never know when this stuff's going to go down. This is a great way to get your reps and sets in, right?
Exactly. You do this just to, on the side, it doesn't even need to take long to do a turn. It can get a tournament anywhere from 2 to 5, 10, 15, even up to 30 minutes. So really as much time as you really need to dedicate toward it. And it just could be a quick mental game for you to figure out how to solve a particular problem. Even if you're getting your butt handed to you, it's okay, shoot, I'm losing. How can I dig myself out of this hole is sometimes a question that many people might need to ask themselves.
And if you need to break from, you don't want to go cold turkey from your computer, but you feel like you need a break, this is a great way to get off of TikTok and social media and just focus and actually develop your brain rather than rotting it.
Exactly, precisely. So definitely go ahead on our website, check out the Marine Corps Association professional development page, get that code MCA25, and go ahead and get your reps and sets in on the wargaming.
All right, let's do it. Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners. Welcome to episode 225. This week, we continue our discussion of Operation Absolute Resolve, the military operation of Venezuela to capture President Nicolás Maduro, with editor-in-chief of the Gazette and Leatherneck magazines, Col Chris Woodbridge. Whereas last week we dove into the implications of absolute resolve for Taiwan and great power competition in the first island chain, this week we zero in on, at least what we know of, the actual Venezuelan military operation. Colonel Woodbridge discusses the history of Marine Corps operations in Latin and South America, what it means for a military operation to be legal, what may lay ahead for U.S.-Venezuelan relations, and finally, what the implications operations like this and those in Iran and Nigeria have on the Marine Corps' force design. We made this caveat during our discussion, but it is important to continue to emphasize that at the time of this recording, the situation was still very fluid, and so we discuss our ideas and theories based on the open source, unclassified information available at the time. This is episode 225. Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners, thank you for joining us and your continued support. I'm Vic. I'm here with William.
Howdy, y'all.
And as we try to keep up with the churn of recent events, we've brought on the editor-in-chief of both Gazette and Leatherneck magazine here at the Marine Corps Association, Colonel Chris Woodbridge. Sir, thank you for also joining us today.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Yeah, I was actually laughing with a buddy of mine that the current event cycle is outpacing even Duffel Blog right now. You know, that is a disclaimer that probably by the time we even end this interview, things will have changed, and certainly by the time we publish it, it may be a complete 180 from what we're talking about. But as all of the pundits, retired colonels, and national defense experts are coming out of the woodwork, I figure we might as well throw our hat into the fray and talk about the capture of Venezuela's quote unquote president, unelected president Nicolás Maduro. And
They have a word for unelected president. It's called dictator.
Dictator. Fair enough. Fair enough. And so I guess, one of the things I want to do that I think maybe other pundits aren't is to really kind of look at this more at the operational level, talk to about some of the history, and then, the where are we and where are we going sort of analysis on this. For those who are keeping track, we just released our episode with Dr. Mike Hunziker, another Straight Talk, where we talked about the implications of this action in the Taiwan Strait and what it means for China, Taiwan, and obviously for us in Marine Corps specifically, as we continue to focus on the East Pacific and South China Sea in our global peer competition. So, sir, anyway, I'll start the floor with you, but maybe tee up a little bit. What this is not unprecedented, although for recent times, it's shocking because it seems to have come out of nowhere. But as we're learning more, maybe it isn't so. It wasn't quite as unpredictable as we thought. But maybe if you could start us off with what is sort of the Marine Corps' role historically in South America, and what is this term that folks are throwing around, gunboat diplomacy?
So the Marine Corps' history in South America, actually more accurately Central America or Latin America and the Caribbean, dates back to the turn of the century, the turn of the 20th century. I date myself. And 1898, the Spanish-American War, U.S. establishing holdings overseas, naval bases in Cuba, in Puerto Rico, and then getting involved in a series of police actions, military interventions, small wars, most commonly referred to as the Banana Wars, very pejoratively. But there's a reason behind that name, Banana Wars, and it's all about fruit. In Nicaragua, in Haiti, in those Central American countries, and as one of the leading participants, General Smedley Butler, later would be very public in his criticism, was that the Marine Corps, he as an individual leader of Marines and the Marine Corps, were being used as tools of American business interests in Central America at that time, particularly Del Monte and the United Fruit Company. They wanted to maintain their access to those resources, pineapples, bananas, etc., for sale on the U.S. market. And you need a stable government with no insurgents, communist or otherwise, in the nation at that time that you're doing business in. And so the Marine Corps became used as something of a police force. Haiti, very, very similar. The Marine Corps from 1917 until the 1930s was the government of the nation of Haiti. There was no other government. It was the senior Marine officer, President Shore, running that country. And sadly, that was a period of time when things actually worked in Haiti. The roads were built and maintained, bridges were constructed,
Trains ran on time.
Trains ran on time, taxes were collected on time, water was drinkable, and the threat of cholera was largely eliminated. Not the case. Cholera is alive and well in Haiti today and has been for a long time. So, there is a history there, but the background to that history and that involvement of the Marine Corps really rests on the national policy and strategy of the time. And you used the term gunboat diplomacy. That's a name for it, a moniker or a bumper sticker for it. But really what it came down to is at that particular period of time in the early 20th century, the national policy, the national strategic view of the United States was very, very self-centered and realpolitik driven, meaning what's good for the United States is good for the United States and therefore is the right thing to do, the moral thing to do. There was not a lot of argument about that. And the United States at that point was investing in naval power and becoming a global power because of that naval capability. And it was also important to use that capability. That's a fundamental, often overlooked tenet of deterrence and defense. If you don't prove to people that you are both able and willing to take effective military action, you lose the credibility behind your deterrence. And so again, going back to that early 20th century view, and I like to, we can put little magnetic letters on our cars, WWTRD. What would Teddy Roosevelt do? Yes, we would land the Marines, we would land the Army, we would put in American forces, and we would remove regimes, we would install regimes, we would fight insurgencies, which I'll talk a little more about later, as counterinsurgent forces. And again, at that time, in the early 20th century, the Marine Corps was very much the force of choice for this because of our naval character, our expeditionary character. And so at that time, as that force of choice, the Marine Corps was employed doing those sorts of things. If you fast forward, actually, let's cover a little bit more even older history, because you're hearing this term kicked around by people a lot, and on both sides of the political spectrum and both sides of the punditry is the Monroe Doctrine. All right, the Monroe Doctrine dates back to the early 19th century, President James Monroe, and essentially that doctrine was the military and strategic policy of the early United States to prevent European powers, old world powers, from meddling or taking action in the Western Hemisphere. And that was particularly acute down in the Spanish and Portuguese colonies of Central and South America. And so, people talk about now, well, this is turning the Monroe Doctrine on its head.
I think the colloquial term right now is Donroe Doctrine, right? The Monroe and Donald.
Yes. But again, the fundamental tenet there is there's no interest like self-interest. And if it's good for this country, if it's good for the people of this country, if it stands to benefit us in any way, then that's the moral thing to do, the right thing to do. And there's ample basis for it in our law. So again, the political argumentation about illegality, et cetera, really doesn't bear close scrutiny, given the laws that are extant. But the other piece, again, fast forwarding, is throughout the Cold War, we, the United States, have been involved in Latin America, to include South America, in very indirect and very, in some cases, ineffective ways. Um, in so many ways, if you think of, our modern structure of, U.S. Southern Command as an area of responsibility, it has been for decades the economy of force theater. Very little resources expended, very little military activity, and consequently, some negative outcomes in terms of American interests, U.S. interests. And again, if you take as the fundamental tenet that defense or benefit to U.S. interests is the coin of the realm, then we were forgetting that. We were not paying that coin of the realm and treating it like we should for decades. We did a variety of in the 1960s, the attempt to reestablish a non-communist government in Cuba, and the Bay of Pigs failed Bay of Pigs invasion, a paramilitary operation planned and executed by the Central Intelligence Agency, by what is today referred to as the Ground Operations Directorate, or Directorate of Operations. So again, not the result we wanted, because we were doing it on the cheap and on the sly. A variety of efforts, again, using the intelligence community, specifically the Directorate of Operations of the Central Intelligence Agency, and various special forces, specifically Army Special Forces, in Costa Rica, in Nicaragua, and Honduras, to again counter communist guerrillas in those countries. And so, again, a variety of results there.
I mean, Ollie North, right? I mean, we're
Yes,
talking,
again,
his
a very
sort of claim
a
to
very
fame.
recognizable Marine involved in the Iran-Contra scandal. Essentially robbing Peter to pay Paul with soft money, in order to support the Contra guerrillas, the anti-communist guerrillas in Central America. And then, more recently, our, and particularly Marine Corps efforts, as foreign internal defense and training missions in Mexico and in Colombia, very much focused on developing the forces in those countries. In Mexico, developing the Mexican Marines, the Mexmars, as counter-narcotics troops. And they are, to this day, the most effective force in Mexico. And then in Colombia, a training mission to, again, counter the Medellin-based drug cartels in Colombia, but also provide a capability for the government of Colombia to fight its own insurgency, the FARC insurgency. So we've had a long history there, not just the Marine Corps, but the United States in general. But it's been very, very much an economy of force mission.
Well, and it's also been fraught with controversy. I mean, there's
Absolutely.
none of those were, sort of widely accepted, both domestically and internationally. One case that especially as we're sort of on the tail end of celebrating Ozzy Osbourne's life, as we look at Panama, Marines there to capture Manuel Noriega using Black Sabbath as the weapon of choice. And hats off to the Marines for their ingenuity in that. But many pundits are drawing comparisons and using it as a precedent. But I think we were talking before we even started recording that that's not a one-for-one analogy there, and probably actually isn't a good example to use when we start talking about the legitimacy or the legal framework for this operation. Is that correct?
No, exactly right. What needs to be remembered, first and foremost, the U.S. military, particularly the U.S. Army, had a base in Panama, the Jungle Warfare Training Center. So there's a military installation in the country of Panama, partially because of that, and partially because it's a beautiful country. There are over, roughly 40,000 American citizens living in Panama, mostly retired military, retired engineers that worked in and about the canal, lived in Panama. And so they were held at risk by the Noriega regime. And then once again, the casus belli, if you will, the trigger being the narco trafficking, narco terrorism, if you want to use that word for it, to provide the reason, the rationale behind that operation to remove him from power as an illegitimate dictator, head of state, and bring him to the U.S. to face U.S. criminal justice. So in the end, removing an illegitimate leader, dictator, bringing him to the U.S. to face U.S. courts, U.S. justice. Yep, there's a parallel there. But on the front end, Congress was involved in authorizing the mission in Panama. It involved much larger footprint of general purpose forces on the ground.
Well, and a Marine was killed in the lead up to all that as well.
There were casualties on the ground, and so it was much more of a conventional operation, and it really threads the needle between purely conventional use of force and strategic special missions. So kind of the middle ground there, and that's the middle ground as we look towards the future, and we focus on future force design, on the future of the ARG-MU. That's the space, and you can use a variety of terms for it, but it's neither conventional forces nor true special operations forces, where the Marine Corps has plied its trade as an amphibious expeditionary force in readiness. And so if the national strategy is to lean more towards this type of intervention, again, antique terminology, military intervention, punitive expedition, more modern technology, regime change. If we're going to lean more towards those types of military operations, the Marine Corps can provide an alternative to the exquisite capabilities of specifically Joint Special Operations Command and Tier 1 Special Operations Forces.
Well, sir, let's try to tie down some terminology into actually what happened with the capture of the Venezuela, and I'm using air quotes for people who can't see my screen, president, dictator, etc. We've heard things like we're at war with them. This was an invasion. This was a raid. This was a law enforcement operation. How would you describe exactly what happened?
I would describe it as first and foremost a raid, because by the definition of a raid, that's exactly what happened. Again, a raid being sending a force in with a planned withdrawal, which is exactly what happened. It is, referred to as, in common colloquial terms of the Special Operations Forces, a body snatch mission. Now that can form two types. You can go in and rescue our own people. All right, so you're body snatching hostages, so hostage rescue type operations. But this is more of a high value target apprehension. It is a law enforcement operation, and that's an interesting point there. So once again, in terms of the exquisitely trained and prepared, equipped forces that the United States has at its disposal. There's a line. All right, when we need that type of capability in the United States and its territories, that is the mission of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's hostage rescue team and its headquarters, the Critical Incident Response Group. They have the legal authority to work in U.S. territory. They do not have the authority to work doing that mission overseas. They can be advisors, they can be law enforcement liaisons, but that mission, that once again exquisite special operations capability, resides in Joint Special Operations Command, and specifically in the Army's Delta Force and Navy's SEAL Team 6. The primary difference there being SEAL Team 6 has a public affairs office and Delta doesn't, which is why you're never going to see a TV show about.
Wait, isn't SEAL Team 6's public affairs office just their operators?
Sometimes, or their former operators. But the point is, what makes them so special? Resources and selection and training. And so when you combine those things, you select high-performing individuals, you resource them with the best equipment and time and resources, specifically ammunition for training, and you constantly maintain that top level of training for the tier 1 ready platoon, ready units in the National Mission Force, you will get a predictable result. The other thing that makes them very unique is the degree of rehearsal that goes on and the realism of that rehearsal. And as Marines, okay, we're going to rehearse this raid, and we set up a bunch of engineer stakes with a white engineer tape on it, and okay, this is the outside of that building, and we sort of use your imagination, picture if you will. You're going to have to go on the roof and get down through this second floor window. For those forces, those special Joint Special Operations Command forces, they will actually build replicas of the targets themselves. And on the aviation side, they will frankly scour the earth for terrain that best mimics the terrain that they're going to have to fly to at extremely low altitudes sometimes, and other under radar cover, so that they can rehearse over and over and over again on, quote unquote, the ground that they're going to operate on. Once again, what does that do for you? That gives you a predictable, precise result, which strategically is required in a situation like this. The third leg of the stool, so you have the training, the resourcing, you have the rehearsal. The third leg of the stool is accurate, real-time intelligence. And so up to literally the moment of execution, knowing and having visibility on what's going on the target itself. Who's there? How many Cuban trained guards are in the compound, in the building? Where exactly are they? Looking at it through full motion video drone footage at the time of execution, and being able to communicate so that if you hit a no-go criteria, i.e. we expected 40 guards, there's now 400 guards, we're not going in. You abort the mission at that point. So again, you get a predictable, precise outcome.
Well, also, sir, there's a level of support. Not just from an intelligence standpoint, but you've got every asset in the DoD arsenal at your disposal,
and other agencies.
Yeah,
and other agencies.
Because they said 150 aircraft were used in support of this mission, right?
That's right. You had an extensive, kinetic air attack going on that night. Now we all know tactically that's focused on disrupting any integrated air defense in and around the target site, and other command and control nodes, and also other targets for distraction purposes. Just like the schoolyard, nothing works better than look at my thumb, gee, you're dumb. And so that level of tactical support again goes into producing a precise, predictable result. And again, at national policy level, when you're doing an operation like this, that's what you demand. You have to have 100%, as close to 100% predictable outcome as possible. Now, what's concerning, or what should concern, the future force of the Marine Corps is, again, the Marine Corps is not that, and never has been. To include when we had special operations capable MUs, we were never trained, resourced, supported to that level. But neither is that part of the Marine Corps, a fully trained MU, purely a general purpose force. But it's a lot more of a general purpose force than it is a special operations force. One word I've heard used for it, or phrase I've heard used for it, is elite conventional force. All right. So if the Marine Corps is that elite conventional force that fills that gap, we are an amphibious analog to the Army's 75th Ranger Regiment, which does have another layer to it that is in direct support of those Army Special Operations Forces. So they have a training and resourcing relationship there that the Marine Corps doesn't have.
Well, also, sir, I guess to use common nomenclature, if we are advertising ourselves as a crisis response force, there's nothing about crisis response that is as deliberate and as this. I mean, this isn't a crisis response. This clearly was in the works.
We made the crisis.
Right.
We created the crisis for the residual Maduro regime in Venezuela, for them to now try to figure out, what do we do now? What do we do next? That is not crisis response.
Right.
So examples of crisis response, evacuation of the embassy in Juba, South Sudan, year before last. What occurred back in 2010 in Benghazi, crisis response. What do
Liberia.
Those things? Yeah. Well, let's use those two in particular. Okay. What do those have in common? No Marines available, and no Marines employable because of a lack of amphibious ships. Mm-hmm. And so if the Marine Corps is that elite conventional force that fills that sort of gap or gray area between, send RCT-2 ashore in whatever condition we can get them deployed in as a conventional force, and use of the exquisite special operations forces, that gray area in there is where Marines used to routinely operate. We are no longer able to do that as effectively or at all because of the lack of amphibious ships. And so that needs to be taken into account as we start looking forward towards the future of our force design. But the other piece to it is, again, it's never been the same. And having been deployed on multiple MUs and had, been inside the 6-hour window for a variety of different contingency crisis response missions, the National Command Authority, the senior military leadership, fully recognizes the capabilities and limitations of that Marine Expeditionary Unit, its battalion landing team, its maritime special purpose force, which are, essentially SEALs and reconnaissance Marines that do have capabilities to do elite conventional missions like visit board search and seizure of a commercial or military vessel, seizure of a gas and oil platform, those sorts of unique missions, which are going on right now off the coast of Venezuela and in the Caribbean, and even in the North Atlantic, most recently with a Russian vessel. Visit board, search and seizure, take that vessel over on the high seas. Just as when we were doing it in the Mew, the real problem is what comes next. Once you seize the vessel, you got to be able to sail
Bring it back.
it, right? So you need what's called a prize crew. All right. And so you need deck sailors who know how to make power, make water, make way in that vessel. And now we have a capability in the special operations component of the Coast Guard that does exactly that in U.S. waters and on the high seas. So again, where the Marine Corps falls in all this, it's always been who's available. Can we get the most special, the most capable tier 1 special operations capability there in a reasonable amount of time? No. Okay, can we park a Mew off the coast very publicly and let them know that we are prepared to project power? But when it comes to execution, fully recognizing that you wanted the doctor, but the butcher came instead.
Along those lines, and I definitely want to talk about what the implications of this action are on force design, stand-in forces. But before we do that, so I wanted to really sort of touch on a couple of topics that you mentioned. So narco-terrorism gives us a lot of leeway based off of our recent activity, sort of the blank check that the war on terror provided the executive branch. And then also I wanted to talk to you about some of the I guess the legality, which sort of falls in that realm as well of this operation and how it varies. And because you talked regime change,
right? And
one of the big things that I've noted that was very different in our other attempts, Iraq, Afghanistan, in support of Arab Spring, you mentioned Benghazi, but going after Gaddafi and was that we always had this pretense of some sort of global altruism, or it wasn't the real politique, and now we've made a real shift in that, and we're just calling it out. We're going for oil.
Well, Vic, can I just add a comment to that question? Because to what extent the impression of altruism, but to what extent were those also, can we consider real politique as well? I mean, I think, you could argue that in each of the three examples you listed, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, were all in essence real politique.
No, 100%. And Colonel Woodbridge definitely backed me up on this, is that it's really interesting that through a no competition contract, every DFAC we went to in country was KBR.
Yes.
So, but I guess in a way I'm saying that is the impression, or is our attempt to maintain a moral high ground, is that, is the lie better, or is just being blunt about the truth better? I mean, I'm not sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that word bluntness about the truth, and I'm not, to William's point, there's a mix, okay? In anything, there's a mix. And there's also a narrative. Do you choose to highlight the altruistic elements of your strategy? Or are you blunt about the truth, as Vic said, and do you choose to highlight the self-interest and national interest portion of your strategy? Right now, our leadership is the latter. We're going to be very, very clear about this. We're going to make life better in the United States and for our allies by influencing the one thing, the one resource on this planet that affects everything else. You want cheaper food, you need cheaper fuel. You want cheaper fuel, you need cheaper oil. because we are a petroleum energy dependent world right now. And it touches, so you want cheaper computers, you need cheaper oil, not just to move things around and run factories, but for the petroleum products that make the plastics and other components that make your computer real. So the connecting tentacles, the connecting files of the petroleum industry affects everything on this planet. And so you want, use the simplest bumper sticker there is. What do you pay at the gas station, at the pump? You want that less? You need to affect the international energy market. And there are a couple of different ways to do that. And, we've seen them play out 4 years ago and then over the last year. Number one is you start domestic production. We have the capability as a nation to be an oil exporter, to be an oil and an energy seller, right? So we provide it to other people, they buy it, and we have revenue from that. And we produce it here in Alaska, in the continental U.S. That's one. You then secure access to better, more stable overseas oil reserves. All right. And what I mean by stable is Russia has enormous energy, petroleum reserves. Not the most stable place in the world to get it from. The Arabian Gulf, Persian Gulf, the Arab states, all the way up through Azerbaijan, are historically the greatest reserves and producers of petroleum energy, both oil and natural gas, liquid petroleum gas. Is that the most stable region in the world? It is pretty good right now, but just wait for a reconstituted Iran, wait for some changes in the Saudi regime, wait for more Yemen to cook off, and now you've got major disruption. And so what are you left with? So there's the South China Sea. All right, probably not the most stable. And then you have the two other places that are the premier energy, petroleum oil reserves on the planet: Venezuela and the Gulf of Guinea, the little hook in the west coast of Africa by Nigeria. That's the best places. So in terms of those resources, again, change the one thing that changes everything. Strategically, it's access to those resources, those fuels, and the ability to refine them and move them. So that's the next piece to this, which, everybody's like, oh, what next? What now? Yes, there's huge what next, what now that has to be yet to be determined in Venezuela itself. But where does Venezuela connect to in its north? Panama, we were just talking about the Noriega regime. So we've early on reestablished a degree of control over the Panama Canal. In our hemisphere, that is the strategic terrain, because that's how we move that energy, that petroleum, those petroleum resources. Yemen, Bab al-Mandeb, that is one of the places where we move those resources. Straits of Hormuz, Straits of Malacca, all of those maritime choke points, to include the South China Sea, are where we move those energy resources, those petroleum products. And so having stability and a level of control in those areas, again, benefits us. And what's good for us is good for us. And to a degree, and this goes to William's, again, altruistic narrative point, really from the end of World War II to today, part of the narrative is and should always be what's good for the United States is good for the world. Because we will, whether fully defined as a superpower with complete agency or not, we will help other nations in the world altruistically to one degree or another. We did it for a long time, starting with the Marshall Plan. And I think, recently there's some head scratching and some consternation over what are we really getting? We've made these investments strategically 80 years ago. What are we really getting in return for that? Or are we simply being taken advantage of? Again, a little bluntness with the truth. However, the other end of the spectrum is often even more confusing. And you'll see in the news today that the Secretary of State has announced that we're withdrawing from over 60 international organizations, both UN organizations and other regional organizations. And on the surface of it, oh, that's terrible, we're becoming isolationist. But when you dig in a little closer and you look at what those organizations are dedicated to, well, that may not be the sort of thing that really benefits us. It may be a drain on resources for something that does not benefit the United States or our people. And so, again, right now, with that as the coin of the realm, that realpolitik, what's good for us is good for us. And by extension, what's good for us is and ought to be good for the world.
Well, sir, what are we looking at now? So force design, which is why we wanted to bring Dr. Hunziker on, was because force design clearly articulates great power competition in the first island chain. So we, and please check out the episode. It's out now. Really great analysis on what this means for Taiwan, what this means. I mean, China just finished up, the DC spinoff comic Justice Mission 2025. And so, that being said, force design clearly focuses in South China Sea, first island chain, and with our regional partners there. But we haven't seen, and I guess one of the arguments about force design is that what's going to end up happening is, as we're refining, experimenting with force design, we're going to end up having to brush off the Small Wars Manual. And then we're talking regime change, we're talking about gunboat diplomacy. What's old is new. If anything happens in Venezuela that isn't in lockstep, it's going to require boots on the ground, at least in my, from the cheap seats here. So what are we looking at with force design? What is the future? What is this signal for the future of the Marine Corps, at least, over the next 5-10 years?
I think, and this is not a great position to be in, but I think we're going to see over the next, most acutely over the next year, an all of the above approach, right? And so the Marine Corps, and we've traditionally done this. It may not be messaged very well. Again, control of that narrative may have gotten away from us a little bit, but I don't think force design, and specifically force design 2030, was ever envisioned as an either or proposition, as in either stand-in forces, small Marine Littoral Regiment, Littoral Combat Team, missile, drone, counter-drone forces in the first island chain, or Marine Expeditionary Units generated to deploy on amphibious ships, or a more combined arms, for want of a better term, war of fire and maneuver Marine Corps, capable of doing sustained operations ashore in situations or environments like Iraq, Afghanistan, or that same force able to do, for want of a better term, occupation duty. Again, using some antique terminology here, the military intervention is kind of an in-out sort of thing, a raid, but then you've got to maintain order and ensure the results you want. Now you're occupying another country, which opens you up to counterinsurgency, insurgency, irregular warfare, war among the people. And I said I'd mentioned this before. The number one rule about that is often overlooked is never get involved or take sides in someone else's civil war.
Oh, I thought you were going to say never fight a land war in Asia, but I guess.
Well, sadly, there's a crossover there.
Okay.
Because if you look at the examples, never take sides in someone else's civil war. Vietnam, at its root, was a civil war. Korea was a civil war. To a degree, Afghanistan, Iraq became civil wars as soon as central authority was removed. I don't think that's a concern, as much of a concern in Venezuela or really throughout South and Central America. There are certainly civil stresses in a lot of those societies, mostly between the indigenous populations and the peninsulares, the Hispanic colonial populations. But it's more pronounced in some countries than others, and it gets a nice heavy flavoring of Marxist, Leninist communism in there, guerrilla communism as well. Again, remember who wrote the book on it: Che Guevara, Bolivian guerrilla leader, Cuban trained. So what does that mean? That means all of the above. That means you are in the unenviable position where the Marine Corps has a requirement to be all things to all people. And frankly, that's untenable. It's unrealistic. Some things have to take the back seat. Right now, and really since about 2015, small wars, irregular warfare, counterinsurgency, that has very much gone to the back burner. We see it, the three of us, in the pages of the Gazette. There just aren't that many people writing on those subjects anymore because they're not as relevant, or at least not perceived as relevant for today's Marine Corps. That started with the pivot to the Pacific in the mid 2000s, and then certainly came to fruition with Force Design 2030. But does that mean that there's never going to be a requirement to dust that off again? Absolutely not. And history shows us that we dust it off, relearn a lot of lessons, develop structure, education, training programs to develop those capabilities in the Marines that we're putting into that kind of a fight. And so I think the best situation is going to result in a elite conventional force capable of a fairly broad mission set, meaning multiple tools in the toolbox. All right, stand-in force tools,
Right.
ARGMU tools, some foreign internal defense tools, some foreign, theater security cooperation engagement tools, some special operations like tools, particularly on the aviation side. Some unique capabilities inherent in the ACE of the Marine Corps.
Well, cyber as well, right, sir? Because we saw one of the
space
phase zero
space
ops.
and cyber. So having that modern mission set, and the modern definition of combined arms in that mission set, but having the ability to dust off and regrow capabilities as needed. I firmly believe that if things really kind of go pear-shaped in Venezuela, and we wind up with a long duration occupation there for some form of civil stability, we will be teaching graduate level Spanish at the Command and Staff College, like we try to do with Arabic and Farsi and Pashto. And we will stand up a Center for Operational Cultural Irregular Warfare to develop mobile training teams to go to battalions that are deploying down to Caracas. So it's certainly there, and I think that's the situation the Marine Corps really has always been in and will continue to be in. We don't have the luxury of going either or on much of anything.
Yeah, I guess
So-
General Berger said it right with that we have a perfect record of getting it wrong.
Exactly. But we also we also fail with hedging strategies too. So there's a blend in there. We've got to double down on certain aspects of that most likely, most dangerous mission set. But we also need to have the ability to build up or build back that broader capability.
Sir, one thing that we've had in our previous discussion about this issue, and that's been going around the circles, both politically and militarily, is signaling on the geopolitical spectrum. So, how would you argue that our adversaries are viewing this? How would you argue that Venezuela, because I don't know if regime change is the right terminology because it's the dude's vice president's in charge now, but how would they interpret the situation, the new guys in the office? What are your thoughts on this?
Sadly, I take a very dim view of human nature fundamentally. Who stands to benefit the most out of this? Madam Vice President, who is Madam, La Presidenta now. So, it's good to be the king. You now move into a position where you're both very exposed. So, next up, we'll keep going until we get someone we can work with. And we've done that in other countries, Vietnam, Korea. Ultimately you result in the old saying, the guy in charge of that country is an SOB, but at least he's our SOB. And that works for a little while until the people of that country get tired of it and they get a vote. And so that's another piece to this. But in terms of the messaging, the signaling around, yes, it's already well established out there in sort of the blogosphere and the news world. Mexico, are you next? Cuba, are you next? Those are totally different equations. Not least of which because they have more capable militaries to a degree, and they're also ready for it. So we've now also, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to pull a raid on you, a law enforcement raid. The indications really send the message. So, and Vic, you hit on this earlier, narco-terrorism. If an individual head of state, the new president of Mexico, if Madam Presidenta is designated a narco-terrorist because of what comes out of and through Mexico, that's the first indication that you may be next up for the heavy house call at night. Cuba, different long-standing old feud there, and really a fundamental view of geopolitics for one of the last true communist regimes. But here's the other side to it. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. If I was the president and premier of Taiwan, I'd be looking at my personal security regime. How am I secured? Am I exposed to a People's Republic of China, a People's Liberation Army special operation to do exactly the same thing and designate me as the leader of a rebellious province and go arrest me? That's we have now set a precedent that's okay in a world of realpolitik, and what's good for me is good for me. So little bit of an issue there. Other countries have similar regional competition problems, but I don't think there's anyone that could be more dangerous than the China-Taiwan piece. So North Korea, South Korea, there have been multiple attempts by the North to assassinate South Korean presidents. Not so much on the other way because it's a much harder target to try to get hold of. Not saying it's impossible. The other piece to that again is and you hit on this earlier, our own legality. So we designate a state a narco-terrorist. We designate an individual dictator, illegitimate leader as a narco-terrorist. We have also designated fentanyl a weapon of mass destruction. Okay, when you put those together, you have a much broader authority, not just to take military action, but how you prosecute someone under our laws on the back end. And so, to my knowledge, this has not come into the legal mix with Nicolás Maduro. That he was in any way facilitating fentanyl coming into the country, facilitating a weapon of mass destruction employed in the United States. But if someone can make that connection, there's whole other jeopardy that comes into play for him. Oh, by the way, jeopardy. He is now subject to U.S. law. He will have a defense attorney. All U.S. laws bind equally. So, get ready for a great big show. There's going to be to one degree or another, public trial in the Southern District of New York. His defense team in discovery can pull out into public all manner of information, to include things that had been classified or are still classified, but they can't make an argument that can't come into a public trial. And so, there's going to be a very onerous and unpleasant legal procedure that goes on from here. So.
Well, I mean, as far as, things getting into the public sphere, his Nike tracksuit is flying off the shelf, apparently. So there's a lot of implications from this. Well, sir,
Wow.
we really appreciate you taking the time this morning to, sort of break this down. I know, a lot of it is thinking out loud because we don't have a ton of info.
I'd actually like to wrap a ribbon around that. So these are our opinions, personal opinions, again, based on
open source.
Yeah. I don't have any inside knowledge of the mission itself, of any of the military forces involved.
We're just trying to read the chicken bones like everybody else.
Yeah. And so, as you said at the very beginning, not just because of the level of our access to information, but also because of the pace of change and developments in what's going on. By the time we broadcast this, we may be completely wrong and
right.
Just jackasses across the board.
That's that's sort of our the subheading to this podcast. So we're good, sir. Well, again, sir, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it. William, you have any closing thoughts or anything?
Good to go. Just stay tuned in. We're gonna have some more Venezuelan content coming up, as it's a hot issue, and hopefully it remains hot and nothing else comes up between now and then. But we'll see.
Yeah. We'll take a simmer for a little bit here because it was scorching there for a little while. So, well, thank you both for coming on, and thank you, listeners, for joining in. A common axiom is that those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Another axiom is that we sweat in peace so that we don't bleed in war. Here at the Marine Corps Association, we fully understand both. That is why we offer, through our professional development page on our website, a comprehensive catalog of battle studies, tactical and ethical decision games, and war games to ensure that not only do we learn from the past, but we embrace the thoughts and decisions that influence the outcomes of some of the greatest actions of the Marine Corps. We have tools and techniques that will enhance both unit training as well as enable comprehensive self-study. Check out all that the Marine Corps Association has to offer on our website. Go to mca-marines.org/professional-development. That's mca-marines.org/professional-development, and get your reps and sets in. Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. You have heard the voices or contributions from Major Vic Rubel, USMC retired, Nancy Litchman, William Truding, and our guest. Ty Frazier is the editor, sound engineer, and technical producer. The Marine Corps Association is not an agency of the U.S. government. The opinions expressed in this episode are the personal views of the participants and do not reflect the official position of the United States Marine Corps, the Department of Defense, or the Marine Corps Association.